$560 million to remain available until expended for carrying out new construction, improvements to energy and water efficiency or climate resilience, the removal of health and safety hazards, and the preservation and revitalization of housing authorized under Sections 514, 515, and 516 of the Housing Act of 1949, 42 U.S.C. 1484, 1485, and 1486, subject to the terms and conditions in subsection B. 2, $200 million to remain available until September 30, 2024, to provide grants under Section 521A(2) of the Housing Act of 1949, 42 U.S.C. (1490A)(2), or agreements entered into in lieu of debt forgiveness or payments for eligible households as authorized by Section 502, c. 5d of the Housing Act of 1949, 42 U.S.C. 1472, c. 5d, to provide continued assistance to households assisted pursuant to Section 3203 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and 3. $240 million to remain available until expended for the costs to the Secretary of administering and overseeing the implementation of this section, including information technology, financial reporting, research and evaluations, other cross-program costs in support of programs administered by the Secretary in this title, and other costs. B. Preservation and revitalization terms and conditions. 1. Loans and grants and other assistance. The Secretary shall provide direct loans and grants, including the cost of modifying loans, as defined in Section 502 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, 2 U.S.C. 661A, to restructure existing Department of Agriculture multifamily housing loans expressly for the purposes of ensuring the project has sufficient resources to preserve the project for the purpose of providing safe and affordable housing for low-income residents and farm laborers, including a. reducing or eliminating interest, b. deferring loan payments, c. subordinating, reducing, or reamortizing loan debt, and d. providing other financial assistance, including advances, payments, and incentives, including the ability of owners to obtain reasonable returns on investment, required by the Secretary, including such assistance to non-profit entities and public housing authorities. 2. Restrictive Use Agreement. The Secretary shall, as part of the Preservation and Revitalization Agreement, obtain a restrictive use agreement consistent with the terms of the restructuring. c. Implementation. The Secretary shall have authority to issue such regulations or other notices, guidance, forms, instructions, and publications as may be necessary or appropriate to carry out the programs, projects, or activities authorized under this section, including to ensure that such programs, projects, or activities are completed in a timely and effective manner. Sec. 40009. Housing vouchers. A. Appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in this section referred to as the Secretary, for fiscal year 2022, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated. 1. $48,460,000,000 for A. Incremental tenant-based rental assistance for extremely low-income families under Section 8(o) of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. 1437(f)(o), b. renewals of such tenant-based rental assistance, and c. fees for the costs of administering tenant-based rental assistance and other eligible expenses, as determined by the Secretary, such as security deposit assistance and other costs related to the retention and support of participating owners. 2. $24 billion for A. Incremental tenant-based rental assistance under Section 8(o) of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. (1437(f)(o) for households experiencing or at risk of homelessness, survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and survivors of trafficking families. B. Renewals of such tenant-based rental assistance, and c. fees for the costs of administering tenant-based rental assistance and other eligible expenses, as determined by the Secretary, such as security deposit assistance and other costs related to the retention and support of participating owners. 3. $500 million for A. Tenant protection vouchers for relocation and replacement of public housing units demolished or disposed of pursuant to Section 18 of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. (1437p) as part of a public housing preservation or project-based replacement transaction using funds made available under this Act. B. Renewals of such tenant-based rental assistance, and c. fees for the costs of administering tenant-based rental assistance and other eligible expenses, as determined by the Secretary, such as security deposit assistance and other costs related to the retention and support of participating owners. 4. $750 million for competitive grants, subject to terms and conditions determined by the Secretary, to public housing agencies for mobility-related services for voucher families, including families with children, and service coordination. 5. $500,000,000 for eligible expenses to facilitate the use of voucher assistance under this section and for other voucher assistance under Section 8(o) of the United States Housing Act of 1937, as determined by the Secretary, including property owner outreach and retention activities such as incentive payments, security deposit payments and loss reserves, landlord liaisons, and other uses of funds designed primarily A. to recruit owners of dwelling units, particularly dwelling units in census tracts with a poverty rate of less than 20%, to enter into housing assistance payment contracts. and b. to encourage owners that enter into housing assistance payment contracts as described in subparagraph A, to continue to lease their dwelling units to tenants assisted under Section 8(o) of the United States Housing Act of 1937. 6. $750 million for the costs to the Secretary of administering and overseeing the implementation of this section and the Housing Choice Voucher Program generally, including information technology, financial reporting, research and evaluations, other cross-program costs in support of programs administered by the Secretary in this title, and other costs. And 7. $40 million for making new awards or increasing prior awards to existing technical assistance providers to provide an increase in capacity building and technical assistance available to public housing agencies, except that the Secretary may use not more than 10% of the amount made available under this paragraph to increase prior awards to existing technical assistance providers to provide an immediate increase in capacity building and technical assistance. B. Terms and conditions. 1. Allocation. The Secretary shall allocate initial incremental assistance provided for rental assistance under subsection A. 1 and 2 in each fiscal year commencing in 2022 and ending in 2026 in accordance with a formula that includes measures of severe housing need among extremely low-income renters and public housing agency capacity, and ensures geographic diversity among public housing agencies administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program. 2. Election to administer. The Secretary shall establish a procedure for public housing agencies to accept or decline the incremental vouchers made available under this section. 3. Failure to use vouchers promptly. If a public housing agency fails to lease the authorized vouchers it has received under this subsection on behalf of eligible families within a reasonable period of time, the Secretary may offset the agency's voucher renewal allocations or revoke and redistribute any unleased vouchers and associated funds, including administrative fees and other expenses referred to in subsections A. 3 and A4 to other public housing agencies. 4. Prohibition of use under Moving to Work program. Public housing agencies designated as Moving to Work agencies shall be eligible for an allocation under this section, but may only use such amounts for the activities listed in subsections A, for which the funds were provided to such agency. 5. Cap on project-based vouchers for vulnerable populations. Upon request by a public housing agency, the Secretary may designate a number of the public housing agency's vouchers allocated under this section as accepted units that do not count against the percentage limitation on the number of authorized units a public housing agency may project base under Section 8(o)(13)(b) of the United States Housing Act of 1937. In accordance with the conditions established by the Secretary. This paragraph may not be construed to waive, limit, or specify alternative requirements, or permit such waivers, limitations,